All right, so this time you guys sent in something really cool. It's a transcript, actually, from Podcast Speak English. Their episode number 8 is called Learn English with Native Speakers English Podcast. And what really jumped out at us was how this English lesson, it's aimed at beginners, right? But it uses a visit to a farm as this kind of springboard into a much bigger conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the surface, you've got Marco and Catherine, the hosts, and they're using this everyday scenario like someone going to a farm to teach basic vocabulary and phrases. But when you look closer, it's the setting itself, the whole experience of being in the countryside surrounded by farm life that gives us these little insights into how language shapes our perception of different places.
Totally. And we're not just going to run through the dictionary definitions of goat and stable here, right? We're more interested in those subtle things, the way this conversation reveals different points of view, especially that contrast between city and country living. We want to unearth those hidden gems that make you go, "Oh, that's why they say that. Let's dive right in."
So the first thing Marco and Catherine do is they clear up the difference between country, meaning a nation, and the country or the countryside as a place. Super basic for English learners, sure, but it really underlines how we categorize spaces.
Right. They're very specific that the country or the countryside refers to areas outside of the city where you've got less buildings, more nature, and definitely animals. And they keep mentioning this feeling of peace and quiet. Makes you wonder why those two things are always linked to rural environments in our minds.
Yeah, that's a good point. It suggests a certain value placed on tranquility, this idea of escaping the noise and busyness of city life. We hear it all the time, right? Like peaceful countryside retreat and stuff. They also make that clear connection that farms are found in the countryside, which seems obvious, but it's like a core element for understanding the context of this whole lesson.
And Catherine adds her own 2 cents, saying she genuinely likes the countryside precisely because it is quiet and peaceful. It's a small thing, but it kind of hints at a potential difference in how people value their surroundings, which, as the dialogue goes on, becomes even more obvious.
It does. So once they've set the scene about where everything's taking place, the lesson shifts to this dialogue. And this is where we really see that clash between someone used to city life and the realities of being on a farm.
The situation they create is super relatable. It's like one person's always dreamed of having this farm, this super romanticized picture of rural living, growing their own food, being surrounded by nature.
And it sounds idyllic, right?
It does. But then you get the immediate reaction from the other person, who we assume is way more comfortable in an urban setting. And their experience is completely opposite. It's sensory overload from the get-go. It's almost comical how quickly things go south for the city slicker. First, there's this unexpected sound, a goat. They're like, "What was that?" All startled. And it just doesn't stop. Cows grazing a sheep, noises from the stable with horses and donkeys. It's like their senses are under attack.
It's not just the sounds themselves, though, right? It's how much they freak out. Really makes you think about how used we get to the more predictable sounds of the city. These natural noises on a farm, things that might sound normal or even nice to someone else, are clearly like nails on a chalkboard to this person.
And it all leads up to this perfect line. You know what? I don't think I can hack it out here in the countryside. I'm going back to the city. Talk about a strong statement. It sums up that feeling of being completely out of one's depth.
It really does. This sense of being unable to adapt to a new and overwhelming environment. And that brings us nicely to the language that Marco and Catherine zero in on, starting with the farm-related vocab.
Okay, so first up is goat. They describe it as a strange-looking animal, often skinny, which is interesting wording, right? Shows you a certain perspective. And you mentioned the sounds they make.
Right. Strange looking immediately tells you this person isn't familiar with goats. They also cover the practical stuff, like goats being a source of milk and cheese, which is important for understanding their purpose on a farm.
Yeah.
And they add that detail about their habitat, rocky mountainous places, good climbers, which kind of rounds out the image beyond just a farm animal. Why do you think they threw that in about the habitat?
I don't know. It's interesting. Maybe to broaden the idea of where these animals come from, that they're not just stuck on farms. Add some context. Okay, next we've got graze. It's a verb, and they explain it as the way animals like cows eat grass slowly in a field. That whole image of a cow peacefully munching away is like classic countryside, isn't it?
It is, and the focus on slowly and in a field really captures that slow pace. Like they're walking, they stop, they eat some grass, they walk, they stop again. It's very specific. Makes you think about the rhythm of life, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. So different from the hustle and bustle we often associate with cities. Next, they cover milk, And it's cool that they explain how it can be both a noun, the actual liquid, and a verb, the act of getting it. And they specifically mention that milking a cow means you're extracting it from the udder.
And Catherine uses the word udder too, explaining it as that big bag full of milk.
Yeah.
Very direct visual, helpful for learners who may have never seen one, makes the whole process less mysterious.
Totally. And finally, we've got the word stable. This is the building on a farm where horses, cows, donkeys live, provides shelter from the elements. They also mention the idea of separate rooms or compartments inside. What's the significance of highlighting that shelter part?
It emphasizes the care that these animals get on a farm.
Yeah.
They're not just left out in the fields, there's a system in place for their well-being.
Mhm.
Speaks to the farmer's responsibility, right? So that's the vocab covered. But they also spend time on how certain phrases are used, what they call fluency builder.
Right. And the first one is, I have to confess, Marco and Catherine explain that while it can mean admitting you did something wrong, like confessing a secret, it's also used more generally to start a sentence when you're being honest, even if it's not about something bad, just to be polite.
Exactly. And the example they give, I have to confess I'm not a huge fan of that sweater, is perfect. It shows how the phrase softens a potentially critical comment, right? Less harsh than just saying, I don't like that sweater.
Yeah.
Shows the importance of being polite when you're communicating.
And then there's, I don't know the first thing about farming. They break this down to mean I have absolutely no knowledge, or I don't even know the basics. And they give a few other options too. I don't know anything about farming, or I don't know a thing about farming. Why is it useful to have so many ways to say essentially the same thing?
It gives you choices in how you express yourself. Just on the context, who you're talking to, right? I don't know the first thing really emphasizes complete cluelessness. And they're right, this phrase is super adaptable. You could use it with anything you don't know about. Cars, cooking, quantum physics, you name it.
It's great for when you want to admit you're not an expert without sounding totally stupid. And the last phrase they cover is, I can't hack it, out here in the countryside. This one they explain as, I can't handle this, I'm not capable, or this is too much. Hack it itself is pretty informal, isn't it?
Yeah, very colloquial. They're like a casual way of saying you can't cope.
Yeah.
And the examples they give someone not being able to hack the pressure at a job or not being able to hack the cold really drive the point home. It's about not being able to withstand something.
And when you think about that farm visit, it totally captures how overwhelmed the city person is. They just can't deal with the rural setting. So we've looked at the vocab, the phrases. Let's zoom out a bit. What are some of the bigger takeaways from this simple English lesson? Catherine mentions how much she enjoys the quiet of the countryside, being around animals, going on long walks without all the city noise.
And her point about how refreshing it is to be without internet or cell phone coverage, that's really interesting too, speaks to this need to disconnect from always being online, from the crazy pace of city life. Makes you wonder if that desire for unplugging is becoming more and more common.
Totally. And Marco makes this really insightful observation about city dwellers who have never actually seen live farm animals and their surprised reactions to things like chickens and cows. It highlights this growing disconnect between city and country experiences for some, almost like these animals are becoming mythical creatures to some people.
It does bring up a good point about where our food comes from, our connection to nature. If seeing a cow in real life is a surprise, what does that say about our daily lives, our awareness of how food is produced?
Catherine also mentions the practical skills you could learn in the countryside. Cooking for yourself, getting food directly from the source, adapting to life without fancy gadgets like microwaves. It suggests a self-sufficiency that you might not find as much in cities. It's a different relationship with your surroundings.
And then she throws in the less glamorous side too, the dirt, the mud, the bugs, all presented as potential obstacles for people used to a more sanitized city life. It's a dose of reality to counter that idealized image of the countryside. Shows that there are trade-offs no matter where you choose to live.
So for everyone listening and what we've uncovered in this deep dive into a basic English lesson about a farm, it's so much more than just vocabulary. We've seen these different views on city versus country life, the potential for culture shock even within your own country, and some assumptions we might have about the world around us.
You've now got a richer understanding, not just of these English words and phrases, but also of different ways of life and why someone might have such a strong reaction to something as ordinary as a trip to a farm. It shows how language is deeply connected to our cultural experiences and how we see the world.
And with that in mind, here's something to think about. Think about your own experiences with different environments, whether it's the country versus the city, or even a place that was just very different from what you were used to. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like that person in the dialogue who just couldn't hack it? What are some everyday things you take for granted that might seem completely new or strange to someone else? And how does the language we use influence how we understand and talk about these different worlds? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.